Welcome to Elevate, the podcast where we dissect exceptional achievers who are consistently raising the bar personally and professionally to produce extraordinary results in investment real estate and ultimately in their lives. Now here's your host, Tyler Chesser.
Elevate Nation, welcome back. This is Tyler Chesser. I'm so thankful to have you here, and I'm so blessed to be sitting with my friend, Ben Lapidus. Ben, how are you, sir?
Doing well, Tyler. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here, and it's great to see the beautiful face and to have a great discussion today. And I want to welcome Elevate Nation back because it's time to take it to another level. I have no doubt we're going to be doing that today. And I want to welcome you back to the show where our mission is to identify and apply how the best of the best raise the bar personally and professionally to achieve greatness in real estate and beyond. We're going to be talking mindset. We're going to be talking habits, routines, systems, tools, strategies, and so much more from an individual who is elevating to a life without limits so we can all do the same for ourselves. And I want to remind you that this is a masterclass because we're sitting with the master himself, Ben Lapidus. This is for leaders and those looking to achieve uncommon results and purposeful outcomes through real estate investing and ultimately in their lives. And if you appreciate what we're doing, please give us a subscribe. Click the subscribe button. Give us a rating, a 5-star rating if you're so inclined, and leave us a review of specifically what are you applying in your life, because it's not just about identifying the tactics, identifying the strategies. It's about applying them immediately and getting that your own feedback in your own business, in your own life, and creating that life for yourself. And with that said, I want to introduce you to Ben Lapidus. As the Director of Acquisitions for Spartan Investment Group LLC, Ben brings his skills in asset management and financial analysis to launch and grow Spartan's portfolio business line. With over 24 successful deals under his belt prior to Spartan, Ben is also the founder and host of the National Best Ever Real Estate Investing Conference and managing partner of Indigo Ownerships LLC. Before Spartan, Ben started a multi-million-dollar study abroad company and worked with several startups through IPO or acquisition. He graduated Rutgers University with a dual degree in finance and economics, where he was the founder of the Rutgers Entrepreneurial Society. So with that said, Ben, welcome to the show, and tell us more about Ben Lapidus behind the bio. Who is Ben as a man?
Ben Lapidus is a guy who's trying to rush through life. Got married a little bit sooner than his peers, had kids a little bit sooner than his peers. And is trying to get to 50 by the time I'm 35, so I can just sit back and appreciate everything that I've got for the back half of life. I struggle with attention deficit disorder. That's been my challenge of 2019 is building scaffolding for that. But I'm also incredibly high functioning with that. I have an immense appreciation for self-awareness and the ability to be honest with oneself and to understand one's limitations and then to find the solutions to excel beyond those, as opposed to ignoring those limitations or ignoring one's reality or not being educated about one's reality and how that affects oneself. So that's those are the relationships that I look to cultivate with people who are self-aware enough that they can take in new information, kind of swish it around in their mouth like a sommelier would with wine, and then take the good and leave the bad and always be looking to optimize. And so because I surround myself with people like that, I continue to grow in that way.
That's awesome, man. There's a lot there. You mentioned that you've been sort of rushing through life to this point and setting up systems and businesses and your family and all these different things. And then, talking about how you've got an awareness of yourself that maybe you've got a attention deficit disorder at times and you're kind of squirrel here, squirrel there, but perhaps at the same time, very high functioning. And so I really appreciate you giving us some insight there. Talk a little bit more about the self-awareness piece, because I do think that, it almost seems like there's a line where you can cross to where you're too self-aware to where you start to get so paralyzed in your own failures or things that you may, still not be as proficient at that you would like to be or distinguished at. Talk to me about that. I mean, how has that process been for you to obtain more self-awareness of yourself and say, hey, here's the good, let's continue there, let's get great. Here's the bad, let's get rid of that, let's outsource that. I mean, how has that process been for you?
Yeah, so I remember reading Steve Jobs' biography back in like 2011, 2012, and everybody that was in that book that was referenced and interviewed talked about his reality distortion field, how he would just look at his reality, was unwilling to accept it, and then go to change it. And that was insightful and productive for producing products that mankind didn't even know it needed or wanted, but it seemed less productive from the folks he was working with when it's nighttime, it's literally dark outside, and he would say things like, make the sun come out. That's not a real example, but trying to change the nature of our existence, like ignore the fact that there is coronavirus right now, or ignore climate change, things like that don't seem to be productive ways to distort reality. And so I've had partnerships that kind of put that idea on a pedestal, that your reality can always be distorted. You can always change the story of how other people view you. And how you're perceived is more important than what you produce. And so self-awareness is not necessary to change people's perceptions of you. And if people's perceptions of you drives your success, then what does it matter? Now, if that's what's required to be a mad scientist that changes the landscape of the world, like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, fine, great. Maybe we need those people, but that's just not something that I'm looking for in my life. I'd rather have outsized, but moderately outsized success, being surrounded with people who I enjoy, who can help me grow, not just in business, but as an individual, than go the egomaniac route.
I love it. Yeah. So, definitely, very timely for you to say, hey, look, let's distort reality perhaps productively and not, the opposite. And, as an example, both you and myself, we're self-quarantined today, right? Because of this unprecedented event that's happening globally. And, with regard to the coronavirus, who knows where this is going to go. But with regard to yourself, what you're saying is, hey, look, you know what, let me identify, where do I operate within all of these different bounds? Like Steve Jobs is probably one of the most innovative type of individuals that, the planet has ever seen. But what you're saying is, from your perspective, is, hey, let's operate in this real estate environment to where we can offer some great opportunities for folks and we can push those bounds, but we're not sort of creating the sunlight when, there's nothing outside. Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much. And I think real estate investing is an industry, is a community where you don't have to be a mad scientist, an egomaniac to be successful. I think there's so much opportunity. It is such a kind of chartered out course for success that you can make that choice to say, I want to be successful. I want to provide well for my family. I want to acquire massive resources to mobilize them to change the world how I see fit, without kind of falling into this trap of thinking that I'm larger than life, or thinking that I'm more important than the man next to me or the woman next to me, or not having to do work on myself as an individual for the benefit of my family.
So Ben, talk to me about, was there a moment in your life when you drew a line in the sand and said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to be, maybe I'm not going to be sort of, this total icon and this egomaniac, but you're somebody who said, I'm not going to accept ordinary and I'm not going to, be average. Was there a moment, or was that a process for you?
Certainly a process. I think that as one comes of age, one is trying to suss out, what is my existence? Like, who is impacting my mindset, and who am I becoming as a result of that? So I remember in high school, I hung out with the AP kids, and I used to talk about these harebrained ideas. I was elected president of the economics class that I was in senior year of high school, and we instead of selling magnets or whatever, we decided to do a monopoly board centered on our town, sell the advertising space to businesses, and sell the resulting product to the students. So it was like two business revenue lines in one. Instead of projecting $500 of revenue for the class, it would have been, $15,000, $20,000 for the class. And we had to go out and sell 40 advertising spaces to businesses around town. And in the process of doing that, I was coming up with these harebrained ideas that I'd sit down with my friends at lunch and talk about these things. And they would all just, as academics, they all pursued academia after high school. They looked at it with curiosity and kind of poo-pooed the possibility that you could do some of these things. And I questioned their motives in poo-pooing it, and I questioned my interpretation of them poo-pooing it. And that's when I started going on this journey of perhaps I need to surround myself with different people.
Are you someone who's seriously looking to elevate your life, your business, your real estate portfolio, your cash flow, your deal opportunities, your access to opportunities, your network this year? Well, if that's you, then I invite you to visit coachwithtyler.com, because I'm currently opening up a few coaching spots for people like you who want to close the gap from where you are to where you want to be, and really, expand that beyond your wildest dreams and explode your business, explode your deal opportunities, explode your vision for what you're looking to create. If that's you, I invite you to visit coachwithtyler.com. I really have to tell you that this is not for everyone. This is only for those who are decisive. They're committed. They're willing to do whatever it takes. They're willing to invest time, energy, and resources into themselves to get to where they want to be and to live a life without limits, to elevate to a life without limits, which is really what we're all about on this show. If that is you, again, I invite you to visit coachwithtyler.com. Again, that's coachwithtyler.com. Interesting. So you were thinking perhaps maybe there was a academia sort of thought process, and there was more of an entrepreneurial thought process that you became aware of in that moment and said, hey, you know what, maybe they're just not like me, or maybe they're not driven by the same things. I mean, what did you glean from that experience?
Yeah. So I had the benefit of two things. One, my dad, who's incredibly entrepreneurial, and would used to drive me around buildings and implant these seeds into my head of distaste for corporate America and say every single person who's working in this building is in a prison cell and their tie is the chain around their neck. And, when you're 4 years old, you're thinking this is like very literal, right? So,
yeah.
And then I went to go work at a sandwich shop, which was owned by a guy who, owned a whole bunch of franchises in the region. And so those two people kind of corroborated this idea that you can choose to be this person. My dad started dad school when I was 6, and I had to read The Richest Man in Babylon and Kiyosaki by the time I was 8, and Og Mandino and How to Win Friends and Influence People, Think and Grow Rich, all by the time I was 10, 12 years old. So
awesome.
It seemed like everybody else was just missing out on this education because I had literally been indoctrinated, didn't have much of a choice about it. So it didn't come to me as though, maybe I was crazy. It came to me as, wow, all my friends are uneducated.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Good for you, and having an amazing dad. I mean, most of us would love to have had that type of experience by the time we're 10,
Yep.
The seeds that you can plant into your mind. So how did that germinate early on? I mean, did you have any sort of entrepreneurial sort of endeavors, or perhaps just even just creative outlook as a child based on those experiences?
I don't know that I did too much on my own. Like I wasn't, coding mobile apps when I was 10 years old, like Sean Parker or anything like that. But I did have a fairly active, for the age that I was at, a role to play in each one of my dad's businesses. And he wanted the entire family to feel like they were a part of the business team in every one of his ventures. And it was a very disparate kind of style of stuff that he was part of in the 17, 18 years that I was hanging out with him. So I did participate that way. And my first foray into doing something myself was being the president of that economics class. And we did generate $12,000 or $13,000 of revenue. I probably did some other things like pancake houses and Boy Scouts, or selling tickets for theater or something like that, but nothing like a business when I was a kid. No, the first business got started when I was 19 years old, the first legitimate business that I started.
What was that?
Yeah, so that was a study abroad company that we started in 2009. Obama had just been elected. The green wave was coming, and environmental engineering programs were just starting to sprout up around the country. And so we looked at the study abroad opportunities for engineers. I was in Costa Rica, and I looked at the amount of hands-on education availability and low insurance costs to bring kids to Costa Rica to literally climb wind turbines to the top, go to a geothermal electric facility, hydroelectric facility, biomass energy production facility, water conservation, biological reforestation, all within a 20, 30-minute drive of each other. No cost to enter any of these facilities, no insurance costs to have to accommodate these trips. And tourism was dead. I mean, 2009 had just occurred, 2008 rather. And there was this green wave, and engineering programs didn't have the time to study abroad. So we set up a 12-day all-inclusive experience in Costa Rica to learn everything about renewable energy production and sustainability. And after our first year, we were able to generate 3 credits for students. Within 3 years, we were doing 500 kids a year at $4,000 a pop, getting pretty close to $2 million a year in revenue. I was spending half my time in Costa Rica by the time I was 22 years old.
That's amazing. It just shows the creativity and the resourcefulness that obviously, is really a part of your identity. And so, with that said, I really appreciate you sharing all that. I wanted to just kind of fast forward a little bit to what you're doing today as a real estate investor and as a partner of Spartan Investment Group. I mean, we're all about raising the bar. We're all about pushing the limits when it comes to Elevate. And so I'd be curious to know, what are you guys doing today? What's an example of a way that you're raising the bar to elevate your own results?
Yeah. You want to know what I'm doing today functionally, or do you want an example of how I'm raising the bar, ignoring what I'm doing functionally?
Tactically, or, from a different perspective. Maybe it's psychological, maybe it's, from a habitual standpoint, whatever. I mean, I see the beautiful, organizational structure there behind you. And obviously you've got a lot of pieces coming together in different ways, but, take it whichever direction you want to take it.
Yeah. So Spartan Investment Group is a real estate development and syndication company that focuses on self-storage assets. And we are really focusing on the company element of that business model. I think a lot of our peer groups are looking at the investment element of that business model and looking for the next deal and keeping themselves slim and building a brand. We are building a company and an engine and a strategy to grow to a point where we are beyond a brand, we are beyond a hustle, we are beyond one individual's ability to identify deals or one individual's ability to raise capital. We are building a private equity business model that can survive any one, if not all 3 of the partners that are driving the business. So that's twofold. One is identifying a good strategy, or really threefold. One is identifying a good strategy. Every 3 years, we go through a strategic planning process. We just finished our strategic planning process in 2019 for 2020 to 2022. And we built that off of the military decision-making process. Scott Lewis, my partner and the CEO of the firm, is an information warfare officer. And so he brought that military decision-making process into Spartan. Number 2 is hiring the right people, focusing on A players only, even if the business cannot sustain that overhead in the long run. We're wanting to make those investments today, even if that means that, we're not putting the $250,000 acquisition fees in our pockets. We're not draining the company. We've set up our LLC with a C election so that we can retain all of the capital in the business, not be taxed on it, and reinvest it for growth. So, despite the recent success that Spartan's had, it has not lined our partners' pockets. It's all being reinvested to add more people, more systems, more processes, more strategy. And number 3, this is something else that I have to give a shout out to Scott for, is just an unrelenting kind of focus on culture. We've built out our Spartan Creed. We've built out, everybody in our company is working on vision boards right now. Everybody is working within our strategic planning process. They have OKRs, objective key results, that are all tied back to that planning process. We do frequent team retreats. We celebrate every closing. There is an unrelenting focus on building out our culture. And another thing, it's not just our employees that are part of our culture, but our investors as well. So every time we close a deal, we have something called a Spartan coin. And it's like a challenge coin. So you close on a deal, you're an investor in a deal, you get a little coin, medallion with the logo of the business that we just acquired as part of your ownership, in addition to the investment binder and everything like that.
Wow, that's amazing. There's a lot there, and obviously, this is not something that Ben is coming up with on the spot. I mean, there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of strategic planning, as you mentioned. Going through sort of a detailed strategic planning process every 3 years or so is obviously where you've been able to glean all of this strategy and all of these different tactics. There's so much there, but one of the things I thought was really interesting and unique in our business is setting up your company as a C corp structure in terms of from the taxation standpoint. And the theory I would imagine behind that is just in terms of building the engine and the business rather than just, a holding company that then owns real estate, because obviously most, any CPA listening would say, hey, you would never want to own real estate in a C corp, but as a syndication or a private equity company, that makes sense. So I'd be curious, is that something that you just recently did, or has that been in place for a while?
It is recent. It's I believe it was part of the Trump tax change that allowed this change. C election on an LLC is pretty new. So I'm going to give a free shout out to Anderson Advisors here. They helped us set this up. They're based out in California. They're a tax strategy platform that not only focuses on reducing your tax liability, but also keeps in mind your desire for business growth, because sometimes focusing on reducing your tax liability can stunt business growth. So, they kind of balance that. And so, what we did is we set up two different companies. We've got a holding company that holds all of the equity for our business. And so all the general distributions and all of the liquidity events flow to the holding company, but all of our fees as a sponsor or as a servicer flow into a management group. And that management group is what houses all of our employees, not just at corporate, but also all of our property level employees, so that we can issue benefits to everybody, not just at corporate. And that management company gets all the fees. It's got a C election, so it's still an LLC. We still benefit from limited liability, but we can be taxed like a corporation. So there is double taxation. But when you look at the double taxation element, if you're paying 21%, this reduced corporate tax rate that companies like Apple and Amazon are being held to, that's 21%. You wait another 5 years to issue the remainder as a dividend, that's 20%. So you're paying 41% total, as opposed to your marginal tax bracket today, maybe 35%. So it's an extra 6%, but when you're pushing it off by 5 years, the second half of that, the time value of money suggests that it's maybe more or less the same, but you've got the benefit of keeping more of it in-house. You don't have to drain your bank account down to zero, essentially, to pay taxes on it and then reinvest it into the company, which is the fundamental mechanics of an LLC without a C election. You can keep it in-house, reinvest it into your people, into equipment, into processes, bigger office space, things like that, and use that to grow over time, and then you can issue your dividends and pay the second half of your tax.
Love it. Yeah. And this all really comes back to just a long-term perspective of building that engine and reinvesting back into your business. And the soundbite also that really sticks out to me is, instead of, lining our pockets with acquisition fees, we can then go back and reinvest into this business that can be long lasting. It can replace us. That's one of the things I love about real estate so much, is that it's a system that can also then allow you to do great things in your life and be the best version of yourself, which is, really combining these two forces in terms of real estate investing as well as personal growth. So with that said, I'd love to know, more about Ben as an individual and as a relentless person, who's growing, on a daily basis. So, are there some, habits that you've consciously sort of installed in your life that really support you in terms of being this great leader and this builder of this engine?
Yeah, I think working on myself is always critical. There's a lot less time for that when you've got to start like several startup businesses and a startup family. So I'm glad that I did the work early on to give me as much leeway as I can right now. I think the biggest thing for me in 2019 and 2020 is building scaffolding. So, as somebody recently realizing that I've got pretty heavy adult attention deficit disorder, I read the book Driven to Distraction, and one of the kind of call out stories that really exemplifies what it's like is if somebody had a gun to your head and said, I need you to focus on this for 10 minutes, you'd focus on it. You'd absolutely have all the incentive in the world to focus on it, right? You don't want your life to end. Yet within about 10 seconds, your mind would start to wander, regardless of that gun being, that's an interesting gun. I wonder where he got it from. What kind of gun is that? So, that's what it can be like. Sometimes you mess up and you don't show up to your buddy's podcast interview, which is what's happened in this case. Is our second attempt here. So building that scaffolding has been really important. And there's a couple of things for that. One is letting everybody know where I'm at, not doing that on my own, because when I don't have the understanding of the people around me, it just causes more stress, and then more stress causes more distraction and causes more slip-ups, which just causes more frustration from everybody around me. So keeping people up to date on where I'm at on a daily basis, mostly my wife, my partners, is really helpful, because then they can kind of oscillate their expectations on a day-to-day basis. Number two is building out as much of a routine as possible. Now, with a 3-month-old and a 2-year-old, when I talk about routine, I'm not talking about, journaling and working out and, doing my meditation and all those amazing habits that people talk about with their mornings and their nights. I'm doing none of that right now. I'm just trying to make sure that I fulfill all the expectations of those in my business and my family, so that I don't drop the ball there, and I can focus on the things that I need to do throughout the day for myself. And so that might be bringing coffee to my wife in the morning. That might be making sure that my kids get dressed and ready for the day. Because it's very easy for me to forget those things if I don't have a step-by-step routine. Because I'm thinking about other things while I'm doing it. And so I'll just completely forget about it, and then the other folks have to deal with it. It might be making sure that all the bills get paid, because if I don't have a routine for that, or checking in with my bookkeeper on a daily basis, if I don't have a routine for that, it could be a week before I even remember that that's part of the business that we have. So building that scaffolding. And then number 3 is making sure that I do take out at least an hour every day. That's what I'm trying to get to right now, is an hour every day to do something for myself. It's not working out every day. It's not journaling every day. It might be just one of those things on a daily basis, but just taking time away from my phone and for my kids, for myself, and also trying to give my wife the same thing on a daily basis.
Yeah, I love the mental image of just building scaffolding. And I don't know if you've ever seen I think it's like maybe it's like a silhouette of a human head, and then there's real estate skyline over top, and you got all the scaffolding, and it's really just about building sort of that empire within your mind. And really, I just love the description of building the scaffolding within your life. And you mentioned a couple of things, is like, don't go it alone. Like, number one is let others know where you're at currently, what's going on in your life, and maybe how you've things don't work out perfectly every single day. And, we all drop the ball in our own ways, and it's just like, hey, I'm just, I made a mistake here. Right. What else would you suggest in terms of, not going it alone? Is there anything else other than just pure communication there?
Yeah, I think it's communication on both sides. That goes back to surrounding myself with people who are self-aware enough to tell me where they're at. Because if you're not self-aware enough to know where you're at, you can't communicate it to others. And that can cause friction, especially for somebody like me.
Self-awareness on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Love that. And then also, just the practicality of building out a routine. Look, we all don't, at the end of the day, life happens, right? You have to service, your life, your family, your business, whatever it may be. You may not have the most perfect morning routine, but just realizing that you have to adapt and grow throughout the processes of your life, I think, is a huge takeaway there. So Ben, talk to me about failure. I mean, how has failure showed up in your life? I mean, you're an individual who's, sort of, you mentioned early on, rushing through life and building so many things now. I mean, what have you experienced as far as failure along the way?
Yeah, I've had 2 startups that I spent 6 months on each as my primary project, fail, crash and burn. And as a real estate investor, I had gone almost 3 dozen deals, all profitable, before I got to my first loss. And then I had 3 back to back, and it was, I threw pretty close to $250,000 of my own money into a trash fire. And that was a difficult time. That was in my 20s, $250,000, still a lot of money at the time. So, along the way, I've had enough experiences to realize that some of the mantras for millennials kind of coming out of college might not be the best approach. Things like burn your boat, put your back up against the wall. I've replaced that with Hungry's make bad decisions. Don't burn your boat. Don't put your back up against the wall. Make sure that you are not emotionally, mentally, intellectually stressed out, because then you can actually think about what you're doing and make good decisions. So, I used to kind of stretch myself as thin as possible. And the idea is if you can do that today, when you have more responsibilities like a family and a mortgage and kids, you'll know what it's like to feel stressed out. But that's just not the right answer, in my personal opinion. Build yourself a foundation, build yourself a rock to build the rest of your life on, and don't let that rock go. Don't bet that rock on something that could have a huge impact, but has huge risk. Keep that rock as your foundation, because that will make sure that you are emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, physically available to make the right decisions as you go through life.
I love that. Yeah. And I mean, this is a great topic to be having this discussion on currently, as we're entering a very uncertain type of an environment with, a global pandemic, as the coronavirus that we're sort of, really kind of starting to perhaps start to get more of an understanding of how potentially serious this is. And, with that said, you mentioned a few times, just as it relates to stress and real estate investors. And that's why we talk a lot about psychology and mindset. To be a successful real estate investor, in my opinion, you've really got to, manage your stress and manage, sort of the internal dialogue. So, I mean, how does that work for you? And especially as it relates to this type of potentially changing economic landscape that we're entering into?
How does that inner voice that can give me doubt and stress relate to me? Yeah. So I had a couple of partnerships early on, the study abroad company in Costa Rica. And that did two things for me. That said, there is a benefit to having partners, but there is a detriment to having the wrong partners. Those were two things that I took away from a partnership perspective. And so, all of the real estate investing I had done in my 20s since then has been a side hustle, has never been my full-time commitment. And I was waiting to find the right partners, because I knew that somebody who has my skills, my competencies, my energy needs to be complemented with another type of personality. But it had to be the right person, somebody that I thought was self-aware enough, somebody who had the same definition of righteousness as I did, and what was right morally and ethically. So how do I deal with that inner voice? Is having partners. Everybody has a bad day. Everybody wakes up with their biochemistry being different than the 6 days prior on occasion. Maybe it's something you ate. Maybe it's the sleep that you got. Maybe it's the lack of movement that you had. But maybe it's just you had such a good day that dopamine drip in your brain was a little bit overloaded, and now you're kind of experiencing a free fall from that. We don't really know enough about the brain, but everybody has those days. But it's rare that if you've got a partnership of 2 people or 3 people, that everybody's waking up with that bad day at the same time. So, when you're having that day of doubt, and that other person can kind of give you that space and be that confidant and be the one to kind of prop up, and remind you where you're at, kind of look at the bright side of things. And then when they have their bad day, you can be that person. And so, if you've got one entrepreneurial brain that's looking a little bit like this, like a sine curve, and another one that's looking like a sine curve, but it's inverted to the first one, the average of that is a much more stable line, on a linear graph. So that's the best way that I found to do that, because I certainly struggle with that, but having somebody that you trust is a good confidant and is in it with you to balance it out, that is the most helpful thing.
That's awesome. That is an amazing answer. And it really goes back to just building the scaffolding. This is another example of the system that you've had, some self-awareness of, to say, hey, look, not every day I'm going to show up, in the same biochemical fashion or whatever it may be. And that, the same about your partners as well. And as long as you align sort of, from a moral standpoint, as well as from a skill standpoint, I just think there's a lot of value in what you just said. And it even goes back to just kind of what you talked about earlier, is don't go it alone, and, let everyone know where you are in terms of your partners, in terms of other people in your life. And I just love the management of stress through finding effective partnerships. And as you get there, having discussions with others, maybe who align with you in other ways. But man, that was awesome. I'd love to know, Ben, what are you guys working on now? I mean, what are you most excited about these days?
Yeah. So two things. The Best Ever Conference is a annual national event, trade event for experienced real estate investors focusing on commercial real estate, whether it's syndication or not. It's for both passive investors and active investors. And that event really took a turn this past year, with the exception of the town that we chose. We had great responses. And the amount of resources that kind of came together for the conferences last year was an inflection point. So it is now a business that stands alone, could be a self-supporting business for folks. And so we have the resources now to add team members who can focus on the event year round as their only thing. So that's going to free up a lot of my mental bandwidth and emotional bandwidth in the process of final interviews today to find somebody to help me. And then Joe Fairless, my partner, that is also hiring somebody on his end. And then these two people can focus on the conference full time. And my expectations for next year are to make this a 7-figure revenue business with over 1,000 people in attendance, close to 100 billion assets under management represented at the conference, and over $1 billion of unplaced capital there. Now, everything might change with the recession that we're currently experiencing. It might be a completely different landscape for next year. But if that's the case, I'm hoping to be the one place that everybody can go to get their answers for how do we survive? How do we pivot? How do we continue to grow in this landscape? Those are I think will be in even more need as a community meeting place for everybody. So that's on the conference side. On Spartan, we're just starting to get that flywheel started. It's the same thing over there. When we started 2019, it was just the partners involved. By the end of 2019, we had a core team of 10 people, and we're in the process of hiring 4 more this year. So, we're going to be a core team of 15 people, probably 30 to 40 people, including at the property level by the end of 2020. And that's just able to get the flywheel spinning even faster. We've done more transactions and transaction volume in the first 75 days of 2020 than we did in all of 2019. So, when you add capacity, when you reinvest, you're just able to kind of get that flywheel spinning a lot faster. So I'm just excited about adding more team members to everything that we're doing, improving the culture, creating a great place to work, and focusing on strategy and continuing to grow.
That's awesome. And Ben and I actually met through the Best Ever Conference, and I definitely would recommend any of the listeners today to go and do some research there, because I know Ben and Joe and their team are doing great work there. So thanks for providing the opportunity for all of us to, have amazing networking. I mean, I was blown away by the quality of people that you guys have attracted there. So definitely kudos to you on that. And then obviously it's exciting to hear what you guys are doing in terms of building the flywheel. I know I've got a Jim Collins, reader here in terms of good to great, the flywheel. I love that. And you're building the system and letting the momentum carry you through. So talk to me real quick, just in terms of the timeliness, of the coronavirus and the situation we're dealing with. I mean, how do you act in this type of environment? I mean, we've had such a long expansion, a crazy, expansion since 2008. And, prices have gotten crazy. Now interest rates are just precipitously falling. It seems like every day you find another rate cut that's happening in the environment. I mean, how do you act appropriately in this type of environment?
I think by taking a knee. There is no imminent threat to commercial real estate at the moment that I can assess. But there is opportunity somewhere. So I think that if, we go out and we make these, these big changes to our business model without taking the time to do assessment, we can make some mistakes. Let me kind of break that down. No imminent threat to real estate. There is obviously a massive threat to the equity markets right now, not just in the US, but globally. I mean, we had another 8% drop this morning on Monday, March 16th. And that is the 6th straight trading day in a row where we've had a significant drop. And I think that we've triggered the maximum drop 4 times in the last 6 days, if I'm remembering my news correctly here. So I think we've broken the 30% correction mark over the course of the last 20 days. So we're way past being classified as a bear market. And that's, again, not just in the US, that's globally. So there's a massive threat to the value of the equity market. At the same time, in the commercial real estate investing world, there's a lot of people who've been waiting for at least a 30% correction, if not a 40% correction, which was the last number that I was hearing from the Roll Investment Group and some other folks at conferences back in January. So, I'm not too surprised. I think it's pretty interesting that it's coming from a pandemic. I think a lot of trading models are going to incorporate pandemic modeling into their futures predictions going forward. But for commercial real estate, CMBS foreclosures are at an all-time low. Lending never got to a risky place. I mean, the lending environment has never really kind of overlent in this environment. Prices and spreads have never been overcompressed. And with interest rates falling, there's just more room for cap rate compression now. How does this impact interest rates? We don't know. The last interest rate cut from the Fed was matched by a push out in spreads to account for the risk. So the value or the rate to retail borrowers like us in real estate was virtually unchanged. I don't know what, based off of yesterday's announcement, kind of close to zero, that's going to be the same. Now, will that mean lower mortgage rates for residential borrowers or lower debt fund rates for commercial borrowers or CMBS rates for commercial borrowers? I don't know. It probably will mean lower rates for those borrowing in the agency world and on multifamily. But for the rest of us in storage, where there are no agency rates, I have no idea what that means yet. But there's $13.5 trillion of sovereign debt around the globe, last I checked, that had negative interest rates. So there's still room to go down if we want to, which means that there is room for cap rate compression once the confidence comes back and we're over the coronavirus. So I think it's going to be more about a shift in confidence than a shift in anything else that we can do within the financial industry. And that confidence is going to come from seeing a reduction in caseload in the coronavirus, not just in the US, but globally. And as of right now, it's going in the opposite direction exponentially. So there's still more room to fall. We own 2 RV parks in West Texas that is completely tied to the oil industry. We have been hit for sure in the last week, but it's not as abysmal as the equity markets. So I think confidence has just been decimated in the stock market. I think we need to take a knee and see what the correlation is to the injection of liquidity in the money supply and interest rates falling, and what other monetary policy might be coming out when they're not just making desperate moves at the Fed level, and what the rest of the globe is going to do to respond to the crisis. In commercial real estate, everything lags a little bit. So you've got the time to take a knee.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great advice to take a knee. And, I just find this whole situation so fascinating. And, I think the biggest thing to look at is how does this impact the occupants, right? How does this impact the occupants of the real estate itself? Because as you mentioned, there's still so many, factors in terms of the actual, real estate itself to continue in terms of valuation increases and those kind of things. And also from a financing perspective, obviously it's a very attractive environment, but from a liquidity and from an equity perspective, how does that actually shake out? But I'm reading a book right now called The Black Swan. Many of our listeners may be aware of, by Nassim Taleb. And it's just fascinating because, the Black Swan isn't something that you can predict. Of course, you look back and say, well, of course, a pandemic could have happened, but this is just something that we never would have expected. And so how are you building that scaffolding within your own mind to say, what are the uncertainties and the unknowns that could occur in the future? And how do we position ourselves appropriately? So really appreciate that. And, I want to be respectful of your time as well, Ben, and transition into our rapid fire section. We call it the Rare Air Questionnaire because we're scaling the mountaintop, and we're going to continue to scale those mountaintops no matter what faces us and no matter what pandemic comes and requires us to self-quarantine. But, talk to me, what are 2 or 3 of the most impactful books that you've ever read? You talked about a few that you even read before you were 10 years old earlier in the show today, but I'd be curious to know that.
Yeah, I think there's always recency bias in this answer. So going to go with some recent ones, but Sapiens by
Yuval Noah Harari.
Thank you.
Amazing book.
Yeah, Sapiens is great. And I would couple that with the blog post series of Tim Urban, Wait But Why? The way that he breaks down his understanding of the world with stick figure models, coupled with some colloquial colorful language to describe things is really fun. And I see a lot of references to Sapiens in his work, and some of the stuff that comes out of it. And that's just kind of understanding the millennial mindset, but also the human mindset. And he just did, Tim Urban, his Wait But Why series, he just did a 9-part series kind of explaining the American brain. So like our collective consciousness. And, I learned concepts like the Overton window and which is a political term. And it just kind of understanding how society shifts as our ability to make up stories has made us the dominant species on the planet, but it's also the thing that limits us from being able to be as productive and efficient and capable as a collective species. So it just kind of understanding that dichotomy in the universe is really interesting, and it helps explain human nature a lot better.
Yeah, that's really cool. I have not read the Tim Urban Wait But Why blog. We'll definitely put a link in the show notes for all the listeners, but I highly agree on Sapiens, one of the most fascinating books I've ever read. And it's amazing because it can give you the insight of why did we evolve to where we are today, and why do we act the way we act, and why does our inner voice, require partners to have discussions with, to say, hey, you know what, I'm on this biochemical wavelength today, but you may be opposite. So really fascinating. And I think a lot of practical insights that you can apply to your own life. So appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. Can I have one more for your listeners?
Absolutely.
Okay. Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. Obviously, it's not a philosophy book. It's not a business book. It is very much classic literature. And Ayn Rand is very much devoid of a singular aspect in all of her writing, which is love. So don't take any of her writing too seriously, like a lot of the libertarians do. But the way that she took 4 different characters to an extreme to kind of highlight deficiencies in human nature from one end, and then, an extreme from another, living a certain set of values to a fault, it was able to kind of highlight things that I appreciate in people that I surround myself with, or don't appreciate in some others, so that I can be selective in who I want to grow with and spend my time around.
That's awesome. Yeah, I haven't applied as much fiction reading in my life yet, but perhaps this is a nudge in that direction. I own that book. I haven't read it yet. So,
really?
Yeah.
Great book. Not just about architecture. If you read it in high school, you think it's just a book about architecture and it's super boring. But as an adult, fantastic book.
That's awesome. Well, I know that she is a deep and profound writer herself. So we'll definitely put a link there in the show notes for Elevate Nation. Talk to me, aside from what we've talked about today in terms of building scaffolding and all that you're doing in terms of building that engine, that you've got there, and all the different endeavors that you're involved in. What's the biggest way that you elevate your life on a daily basis?
Try to be a dad, like a participatory dad. I think it's really easy to say I can just keep working and I can keep making more money and I can keep doing more things and I can keep making a bigger name for myself. But I try to be a good dad every day, because that it sparks that why and it flames that why. And so, it reduces the number of days that I wake up with that biochemistry of like, am I doing the right thing? Do I really want to be doing this? It's like, I absolutely do. I love this. And I love doing it for these reasons.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. What's the biggest way that you elevate others around you?
Yeah. So our mission at Spartan Investment Group is to improve lives through real estate. And that sounds so Silicon Valley-esque, like out here to change the world. But it is a great reminder that that's what we are trying to do. Like, this is what we're good at, and this is what we're choosing to spend our time on. But we want to make sure that everybody we do business with has a better experience after colliding into Spartan than they did beforehand. So it's a better life experience. So every week we start off our sync calls with, how did we improve somebody's life through real estate? And sometimes that's we just closed the deal and our investors are making money. Fantastic. But sometimes it's a lot smaller things, like sitting down with people who are like, this land has been in my family for 100 years. And, it's really special to us. And what do we do with it? And we have those conversations without any intention of monetizing it ourselves. Just how can we be helpful?
Well, you've absolutely been helpful today, and you've changed the lives of many people listening to this show. So really, really appreciate you taking time, Ben. And is there any parting thoughts or words of wisdom that you share with Elevate Nation?
Yeah, just keep listening to the Tyler Chesser Show. He's you're asking good questions, man. I do a lot of these. You ask good questions.
Well, I really appreciate that, man. And I tell you what, man, it's been a lot of fun. And we look forward to continuing to follow Ben Lapidus on your journey, and tell the listeners how they can remain engaged with you and all the things you're doing.
Yeah, you can reach out to me at ben@spartan-investors.com. If you want to hit me up by email, or come check out the Best Ever Conference Show and let's shake hands in person. BEC21.com. B is in best, E is in ever, C is in conference, 21.com.
And you guys have early bird sort of pricing and everything going on right now, right?
Yep, that's right.
Absolutely. So we'll put a link in the show notes to BEC21.com. So definitely want to check that out. I will be there next year as well. It'll be my 3rd year in a row. Looking forward to that. And, I really just want to remind everybody that repetition is key. You want to re-listen to this show because, man, I need to re-listen to it because I was taking a lot of notes and I think I missed a few things. But, you want to re-listen to the show, pause where needed, take notes, take massive action because, that's really where the power is in all that you learned today. But share it also with someone else. Who else needs to know what we discussed today and what they can do to apply this into their life? Take a screenshot, tag Ben, tag myself, tag Elevate Pod, tag your friend who needs to know about what we talked about today. And so with that said, Ben, thanks again for taking time today.
Thanks, Tyler.
Absolutely. Elevate Nation, we'll see you next time. This episode of Elevate is brought to you by CF Capital, a real estate investment firm formed by myself and my partner, Brian Flaherty, where we invest in multifamily real estate communities across the Southeast United States. If you'd like to learn more about our approach, our mission, our acquisition criteria, and how you can learn more about future opportunities, visit cfcapllc.com. Again, that's cfcapllc.com.
Thank you for listening to Elevate. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and pay it forward by sharing with a friend. Most importantly, take this opportunity to elevate your results by taking immediate action on what you learned. For more, visit tylerchesser.com.